Lars Bodenheimer with Coach for Balance. That's my company that I founded 3 years ago. And before that, I was 20 years in business consulting, actually working for a large German telecom company. Before I pursued totally different ways of coaching and helping people more on the health and wellness side. And recently I discovered the true power of the mind that is really neglected, not just in our personal world, but also in the business world, which is where I'm coming from. And I know how we have done a lot of things. I was like, wow, if I would have had the tools that I have today, I think we would have achieved things in a different way. So that's me in short.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And Paul, tell us a little bit about you and your wonderful book.
So I also had 20 years in a very, very different career. And also 3 years ago, I left that career. And I think I'd become quite frustrated. Having worked, I worked in the City of London. I always say I wasn't a banker. I have to say that I wasn't a banker. It wasn't my fault. But I did get very fed up throughout those 20 years. It took me a while to get really fed up enough. And I got really fed up that when I looked around, I was really quite passionate about people succeeding. And I was actually more interested in management than I was in technology, because technology was where I started. And I got really frustrated that when you had technologists, they weren't really very gifted managers. They were usually promoted because they were very good technologists. And so I saw a lot of really expert technologists become managers, but not particularly great ones. And that they had quite sometimes destructive effects on the people who they managed. So about 3 years ago, three and a half years ago, I decided that I'd had enough and I wanted to actually change that story. I wanted to create a world of better led people. And so my wife said, look, you're not going to be happy unless you're running it, whatever it is, or unless you're showing other people how to run it better. So why don't you go start a business and I'll look after us for a while and we'll see where we get to. And so that's what I did. I retrained as a leadership coach. I thought that was the way to do this. So I am a qualified leadership coach, but it's not what I am. And as I started talking to people, they would say, look, it sounds really, really interesting what you're doing. I just haven't got any time to talk to you. I'm too busy. And I got so frustrated with hearing that I thought, well,
that you wrote a book.
I'm going to have to fix that problem first. Otherwise, I'm not going to get any business. So that's what I did. I used a really simple method that I just naturally did. And it was a 2-step method. And it showed me and the people that I worked with that, yeah, they were busy, but they were busy doing a whole bunch of things they didn't really need to do. And that is the same story that I'd seen for years. And so I thought, well, okay, well, I can see those aren't the right things. How can I get other people to see them? And so I added 3 more steps onto the first 2, and that created a 5-step method that I called the Diary Detox, DETOX. I started running it with individuals. Then I started doing it with teams, then with CEOs, and then cascading it down. I had an app created. I wrote a book, and I'm now in the process of creating practitioners who do what I do within my company, which is called the Diary Detox. And it was only through doing that I got to meet Julie. I did a session at her company, which was quite an eye-opening session. And yeah, the rest is history. That's how I got here.
Yeah. So part of what I want to talk about today, and Lars, you said it. You said the magic word. When you said it, I was like, "Ooh, we should talk a little bit about that." But you said the word tools. And what tools can we give people or bring forward, in this new year? And so when I think of the new year, I think about my personal mission statement, because I did a lot of work with helping people discover their purpose. And so just recently I was a TEDx speaker and my talk was called Discover Your Purpose and Stay on Course. So discover your purpose is something, it's an ongoing practice, but I really practice it I revisit the practice really at the new year, because that's when I start to write my personal goals. And so I know we have tons of work goals, but I also write my personal goals alongside with some of these work goals, because I'm very purpose driven. And so when I look at those goals, you know, I think about the mindsets that we have around those goals and what we're telling ourselves. So Lars, I'm just like wondering from your perspective, tell us a little about our mindset and maybe some of the tools that we could use to help us forward the movement of our goals for the next year.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I think that's, for me, the most fascinating part is that I think we totally underestimate what we carry around with us, right? Because we have different aspects of our mind. We have our conscious mind, which comes up with a purpose and with the goals and with the wants, right? I want this, I don't want that, or like a conscious effort. Or I want to learn a new tool, and then you go about learning that. But there is another aspect of our mind that is actually much, much more powerful, which is our subconscious mind. And you may have heard about that in a variety of definitions, but in the context of how we actually run the show of our life at home, at work, in our social circles, it's really driven 95% by our subconscious mind. Yeah, 95% of what we think, feel, 95% of what we think, feel, and do all day long is coming from programs in our subconscious mind.
Lars, that's a little scary to me, honestly.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna have to say that's a little scary to me, because I don't know what I don't know. Like I always tell people that I don't know what I don't know, right? And
Yes.
so if I'm thinking about what this 90% is, and I don't know what that is, and that sort of makes me uncomfortable when I hear you say it out loud.
Well, why does it make you uncomfortable? Because you don't know what's inside of you, right?
This is right. This is exactly right.
And you know, a few days ago, I had an interesting conversation with someone who went through several hypnosis sessions because they needed to extract information from his memory that he was not able to give consciously. So under hypnosis, they extracted a massive amount of data from his memory that he could not consciously remember in the awake state. So what does that say? It proves the point that through our subconscious, we can access the massive storage of our memories, because our subconscious records everything we experience from pre-birth on all the way into our adulthood. And the first 7 years are most impactful, because that is where we are like a tape recorder. That is where our operating system gets configured. Like a computer doesn't function without an operating system, right? So you need to input the software in so you can use the computer, and we are the same way. So that operating system is full of, I know it's big stuff.
Look at Paul's face; he's freaking out.
Well, maybe I can verbalize what I think Julie's concern was, and it's now my concern as well, which is, has this taken away the concept of free will?
Your free will is 5%.
Oh my word.
Okay. Lars, this is okay. So not everyone is going to go and get this like hypnosis. Okay, I'm not going to get hypnotized. I'm just not. I'm telling you now. But what I want to know is how can I, Julie, get to this information without being hypnotized?
So first of all, so there's very interesting modalities out there, and I've tried all kinds of things. Actually in 2006, I did my Reiki certifications because I was always interested as an electrical engineer by trade. I was always interested in electricity and how energy works, and how our existence is pretty much energy, right? Every thought, every emotion is and how does it all relate? And that's how I got into Reiki, and from there it moved on, and eventually across energy psychology, and in particular Psych K, which is a combination of psychology and kinesiology and a couple of other techniques which allow you to communicate with whatever your programming is in your subconscious mind. And what we want to focus on is the things that are limiting you. And you can see that when you become aware of what you're doing all day long, how you engage with people, what kind of situations you get into, where do you struggle, where do you get hurt, where do you get upset, what is triggering you in a negative way. Those are all beautiful sources where it's like, okay, there's something inside of you that wants to be seen. So that's sort of the starting point to where you struggle somewhere in your life, or you just don't want, you want something to be different. That's the starting point for that conversation and for that process. It's first like awareness has to come first. Become aware of what you want or not want anymore.
Yeah, and so you become aware of what you want or what you don't want, and then in the moment you help people like record their emotions throughout the day. Like I just pictured a dial, you know, like you have to really dial up your self-awareness so that you sort of then recognize where you're being triggered and all of these different emotions that are coming up throughout a regular day. Not when something is like tragic happening, but just like an ordinary day, right?
Yes, an ordinary day. And that could be anything. That could be in relation to changing a habit, right? You have an issue with not sticking to new behaviors that you want to start around eating or working out. There could be simply something underlying in your system that you do not deserve to feel good. Yeah, something that got programmed through a weird situation in your childhood that made you feel bad and that made you feel you don't deserve to feel good. Now you carry that forward into all of your life areas, and it expresses there. Yeah, and that's, so there's a lot. And I always say, imagine your subconscious being like this ocean that is filled with all kinds of perceptions and beliefs about yourself and the world. And those can be empowering and uplifting and positive, but there's also a ton of beliefs that can be very self-defeating, sabotaging, limiting. And those are the ones that we want to focus on because they hold you back in unfolding your true potential in your life, professionally, personally, in whatever area.
And by definition, the majority of them are unknown to us.
Yeah, because our conscious, as I explained before, is only, we can, so that's the nice thing about that, and which is also different from therapy. We do not essentially have to like go back to when was it? Like, when was that moment when that limiting aspect was programmed into your software? We can just look at how you run the show. Like, how do you act and react? What do you do and what do you don't do? How do you feel about certain things in your life? And we start from there.
Yeah.
It's very simple, actually.
Wow.
You know, Paul, you also are a coach, and I also coach people. So, one of the methods that I use with people when I coach them is that we do exploration of whatever they want to be coached on. And so we dig deeper into these areas where they then have the opportunity to sort of like, oh, and they're like, oh, like it's that thing that you do with people, and you sort of delve deeper and deeper. Are you saying that like those kinds of coaching conversations get people closer to understanding what's underneath the surface?
Yeah, it's as you said, you first have to bring stuff to your awareness. It's like you mentioned in another conversation that we had, Julie, about driving a car. Right, driving a car is a perfect example of a really like an automatic thing that's happening, like steered by our subconscious, and the reason for that is our conscious mind is limited in its processing capacity. So we constantly need to hand over things that we do on a repeated basis. We need to hand that over to our subconscious, so we free up our conscious to do other things, to come up with new goals, to do the things, to run our life in a certain direction, right? So this is constant interaction between our subconscious and our conscious. And self-awareness is exactly like you said, Julie. It's like getting to this aha effect. Oh, this is actually interesting, because there's this pattern. I get triggered by a certain type of personality. I feel weird in a certain situation. Right? So like becoming aware of these things that are where we don't feel good, and where we feel we are not progressing fast enough. It's like an uphill battle. So those are the things from a coaching point of view that it's like the first important step is to explore that. And yeah, is that something you want to change? And it's like I had a session with a client about purpose, because you brought it up, and she knows exactly what she wants to do in her life, but she was not moving towards it because there were other issues holding her back from her childhood, like a fear of putting herself out there in that new way that is very different from what she was doing so far. So she was almost like sabotaging progressing, even though she knew exactly what her purpose is and what she wants to do in her life. But all kinds of layers of fears were holding her back. So we addressed these fears, and now she's moving forward step by step. It's amazing how liberating this process is.
Can I ask a question? So if you just said no, it's like, well, why am I here then?
No, Paul. We invited you here to ask no questions.
You're here to look good and say nothing. So is it possible then that someone could, and I'll emphasize the word because it's kind of signposting where I'm going with this. Is it possible that someone can think they know their purpose, but actually through going through that kind of interaction, they can find that their purpose isn't really their purpose? Or is it really their purpose? It's just that they've now realized there are certain factors that will get in the way if left unaddressed.
Yeah, the first validation for that would be to, and there we talk about the process itself, right? So you come up with a purpose, you define this beautiful statement about, okay, my purpose is blah, blah, blah. And it's okay, that was a nice conscious effort. You came up with a beautiful sentence. It sounds really good. And there is a way to test if that is in alignment with what you really believe about yourself. Do you believe in your goal, in that purpose pretty much? Is your subconscious belief in alignment with what you think your purpose is? And that can be done through muscle testing. And if that testing is strong, it's like, okay, there is an alignment here, right? Consciously, subconsciously. If it's weak, there's something not in alignment. Either there is some, as I said, some limiting aspect, some fear maybe that interferes. This is really the purpose that you want to see expressed in your life, but there's a fear that is overshadowing it. Or the purpose is not really fully in alignment with what your true selves want. So you want to maybe dig deeper and redefine, right?
Okay, so it is possible then that through doing this, that purpose could be refined. It's almost like your subconscious knows your purpose better than you do.
Yes, exactly.
Apparently so, since we don't know. We're only
95%.
living. It sounds like we're only living 5% of our life, right? When you think about it, because the other stuff is like we're all in a, we're in that what is the habit brain? What do they call that? There's a state of being when they call that, whatever they call that. Is it like in flow, or when you go autopilot? That's what it's called. Autopilot. When you go on autopilot. So so let's talk about what this looks like in real life, because I think there's a couple examples that came up to my head. But like, let's talk about new life. We're on a Zoom call, and it's, how many Zoom calls do we have a day? Like 30 now? I have like 30 a day, every half hour, every hour, something. I'm exaggerating just a little bit. But, we're so used to behaving in a certain way. And now we're going to try this new way. We're going to dial up our self-awareness. We're going to go through coaching. We're going to realize where we're being blocked and things like that. But Lars, I'm just trying to understand, like, how long does it take for someone to change this kind of thing inside of them? And in some cases, does it ever change?
Yeah, so things can change within minutes. Yeah. Because it's just like you're opening, let's say you have a computer and you have hundreds of Word documents stored on it. Now we open one Word document, which is one belief, and we change it. We change it from a limiting one into an empowering one. Right? And then we hit save, and then it's going back into your system. And that's exactly the process. But there can be, and I have an example actually about myself. Months ago, I looked into emotional eating because I have an interesting aspect about overeating. Believe it or not, as a health and wellness coach, I'm not perfect and I'm not overweight because of this, but I find myself overeating. So I discovered 8-9 different aspects that led to this behavior, so to say. And that spread across scarcity, food waste, identity. Oh, there's a guy who can eat a lot. Give Lars, he can finish the plate. I developed that identity as a teenager, and I really lived that all the way into my adulthood. What are you doing here? Constantly stuffing yourself. Like, what's going on up here, right? And so sometimes, to your point, to your question, Julie, we have different facets that resolve in the same type of in one behavior, let's say. So sometimes you have to look into the different facets in order to have a sustainable shift, a sustainable change.
And that would be longer. If there are multiple facets, it would take longer. Whereas if it's just one facet, it could be very quick.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, you made it sound a little bit easy, Lars. I'm just going to say, like, you're going to shift a mindset. You're going to press the save button. And then this is where I want to talk about, go a little deeper here, because I've been coaching somebody also. We've actually been talking about worthiness. Okay. Yeah. And all these sort of worthiness mindsets that are coming up for people as they pursue what they want to pursue. Yeah. Okay, great. We're making shifts. We're doing these things, and we're identifying with something new. Now what happens when life hits you right in the heart, right? Because those triggers are going to come, So now we can talk about how those triggers are going to be managed, but like how does that play out? Like, I wish that I want to say there's this, it sounds like you have a magical cure, like in a sense, but it's hard work to sort of hold your worthiness position in the face of that moment where someone triggers you.
Yeah. It's hard work until you shift it really, right? And when we consciously, okay, yes, you talked about self-worth, which is, by the way, like one of the core things that we all in one or the other way struggle with, right? Self-love, self-worth spills into so many of our behaviors and actions in life. And when you do this consciously, it's like, oh yeah, I'm worth. And I did that, like the whole affirmation thing, right, for weeks and months, like these statements, and you have no way in validating, is that actually exactly what I'm lacking? Is that what is like not in congruence within me? And through these techniques, and again, this Psych-K is only one of them. There's resonance repatterning, body code, emotion code. There's all kinds of modalities that really work in a very similar way. So it can validate and re-record what was put in there at one point in your life, to re-record that. Yeah, it's like you have a tape recorder that you walk around with, and these techniques are pretty much the record button. Yeah, to re-record something that is not
right, that didn't get recorded right the first time.
Yes, exactly. Which is very normal. We all walk around. I mean, we are imperfect, and our parents are, and their parents were, right? So we get re-imprinted with all kinds of weird stuff from a generational point of view. It's a very normal process. And the beauty in our life is that we can discover this, and we can learn a lot about ourselves. We can grow above and beyond that. And so that's, to your point, I don't think for me, it's not scary. The 95% things like, wow, there lies so much potential for us to change ourselves and to really express ourselves and our life in a totally different way. Yeah.
Paul, I don't know, I didn't look at it as potential, but maybe I should flip that what I just said before. And so, Paul, I'm wondering now from your perspective, when you start to talk about people, we talk about calendaring and targets and all the different concepts from your book, it's that thing, like the thing that Lars is talking about is where people get stuck. So it's like we have these great intentions, like we all want to pursue our purpose. I think that's really why we're kind of all here in a sense. But if we're not having the right mindset around it, we're getting stuck. So I just want to hear from you, Paul, like what are you thinking, from your experience?
So I mean, it's interesting because you said we're all here to live that purpose, and some of my experience is that some people don't actually have that purpose. They like to think that they do, but they don't. So I went to a
Wait, can I just stop you a second? They don't have a purpose, or they haven't discovered it yet?
They haven't discovered it yet.
Okay. Okay.
And the story I'll tell you will kind of illustrate it. So I went to an event, it would have been about 15 months ago. And it was at a race course in the UK, and I had a stand there. It was actually, it was an event that was about flexible working. And it was mainly focused on people who wanted flexible working. So for the majority of the people that were there, they were return to work mums, or people who wanted to change their lifestyle pattern. And of course, I'm there from a very unusual point of view. This guy's got this kind of colorful stand, and it's called the Diary Detox, etc. What's this all about? And people kind of looked at me in very odd ways, and then they've got to walk past. And I'm quite smiley and chatty, and I go, "Oh, hi, how are you?" And it would sometimes give people courage to actually come over and say hello. And you could tell that people were looking at it and going, "What's this about?" And there were at least 3 people that came up to me during that day that almost guiltily came over and said, can you help? So can you help me get more time? And I'd say, well, potentially. And they go, well, how? And I say, well, before I tell you that, I need to ask you a couple of questions. And they go, yeah, okay. And I said, so how much more time do you want? And it's like they're like rabbit in the headlights. It's like, I don't know, just some. And I go, okay, I get that was a hard question to ask. I was saying ironically. I said, okay, well, let's ask an easier question. If I gave you some, what would you use it for? And again, it was this kind of in the headlights. I have no idea. And the first thing I would say to people who kind of presented that way was, I'd say, well, the first thing that you could really benefit from is finding out what it is that you're not able to do that you think time is the cause of. Because I have a pretty good inkling that where your time currently goes is probably, from my experience about doing what I do and what I do in my book, it's probably leaking away. And it's leaking away because you haven't probably got the best idea about what you really want to do with your time. And that's kind of what happens. You know, if we kind of come into work and we kind of go, not really sure what I'm here for, you will fill that day with whatever you do. It'll either be procrastinating or whatever else. And so one of the things that I kind of took away from it was, I think that if you had a very clear purpose, what I call in my world, and I'm not equating the two, but they're about as similar as you can get. It's the middle step of my 5-step process, which is called T for targets. If you have pretty good targets, my gut, and they are really true, and this is where Lars stuff is really interesting, because what does true really mean? Then I think you would be a lot more purposeful about how you spend your time. Whereas I think a lot of people aren't very purposeful about where they spend their time. They're either doing a job they've been told they should do, or they're just falling into a job because they need money. They're not really passionate about it. So therefore, what will you do with your time? Well, you'll just do it. You'll spend it doing whatever you want to do. So I think there are a number of people who haven't found that purpose yet. I think the second thing is, I think what Lars said about the belief part of it, I think is massively important, because I think there's one thing to say, companies create their new purpose statement or their mission or vision statement. They go, we are a so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so. And you kind of go, yeah, do you really believe that? Because the way people act in businesses that I see doesn't seem to tally. And so I sit there and think, if you really believe this statement that you're putting out there, I think you'd be a lot more purposeful about how you go about living it. So it's, some people haven't found it yet. Some people have found it, but probably it's incompatible with them in some way, their values or whatever. And then some people have found it, but just don't know how to do it. And yeah, that's kind of where I come into the mix, I suppose, because I think once you've got a really clear view about what it is you want to achieve, achieving it, not wanting to belittle the process is actually relatively simple. And the more you believe in that purpose, those targets, the much more easy it becomes for that process to work.
Interesting. I guess to me, the hardest part is the mindset around, some of these things and these limiting beliefs, because, if I were to look at my own life, I've created my purpose statement a long time ago. There are things that I still haven't gotten to yet. And I bet if I spent a couple hours with Lars, we would figure this out. But there are, Lars, one of the things I keep putting on my agenda is I need to lose 10 pounds. Like every year I put it on there, 10 pounds. I know I could lose a little more, but 10 pounds is one of those, it's like an every year event. I put it on my personal objectives every year, and every year I fail at that one. And I bet you it's New Year's coming up here, and everyone's about to jump and go to the gym. They're about to pick up, these are my New Year's resolutions. And this is an easy one, because everyone can relate to this, especially after the 8 months that we've had eating at home, but what could you tell people about what might block them there, Lars, in their mind?
This sounds like the start of a live intervention.
Yeah, this is a live intervention.
Yeah, it's it could be as simple, Julie, as, and I'm just throwing this out there, right? We all come from, I don't know where your parents, where your lineage is from.
Lars, my dad was a chef. I was brought up with a gourmet chef as a father, just saying.
Okay, so
an Italian as well. An
Italian gourmet chef. That's how I grew up.
Okay, I'm getting hungry as we speak.
There you go. There's a problem.
And I'm just giving you an example of what it could be without, I mean, seriously, this would be an interesting conversation, but it could be as simple as there is an emotional connection. There's an emotional connection for you with food. Yeah, so it provides you comfort. It gives you a sense of bliss and that's why you may not be able to shy away from what you shouldn't be eating. And that especially shows up, and that's why I always look at the wheel of life with my clients, because we compensate with food as a perfect compensator, right? For when something is not really in alignment in other areas. If you're not super happy in our relationship, if the money is not coming in as we want, we haven't found the purpose and we feel it every day. Oh my God, I don't know what my purpose is. I'm not living it. We are compensating this with some in other areas of our life. And food is eating is the perfect like area to compensate for that. So yeah, and that's why sometimes fixing stuff in other areas of our lives, suddenly your health, you're sticking to your habits because you have eradicated the reason why you're using food to compensate for a lack in another area. Just as an example,
It's a great example because I totally I'm validating what you said. The other piece of this is stress. Okay, so all of us, I mean, people that I work with and the lifestyle that I live, I told you I have 30 meetings a day. I sit here, this is what I do all day long. And then it comes to dinner time and like, I just start like eating, I eat dinner and like, I take way too much on my plate. Like, I know I'm eating double portion. Like, I know I can stop at some point, but I'm like mindlessly doing this now because I'm actually like replaying the day in my head as I'm eating. I don't even think I'm talking to anybody. I'm just like thinking and eating and thinking and eating. And maybe that goes back to the subconscious thing. Maybe then eating becomes a subconscious act.
Well, you do it automatically. And there are two aspects to that. So first of all, you can just like subconsciously, as I said, connect yourself to food as comfort for you because your dad was a gourmet chef and your dad gives you security, and maybe you got an extra portion of pasta because you deserved it, you did good, you had good grades, right? So food is often used as a gratification, and we connect to that. It's like an invisible connection. Right? And the other aspect, because you're stressed and you're not mindfully eating, you're putting your body under more stress. And that's just a little other secret, health coaching secret. The way we get so hung up on like what we eat, but it's also important to look at how we eat. Yeah, because how we eat can make the difference. If we eat and are under our stress because we're rushing and we're not really watching what we're eating and how we're eating, how fast we're eating, how much, then that's stressful for our body. And stress keeps the pounds on. It doesn't let go of the pounds.
I remember us talking before, and I can be quite simplistic. I like to keep things simple whenever I can, because I think, yeah, life is complicated, but it's complicated enough. Let's just try and keep it simple first, and then we'll become complicated if we can't explain things. And I've always used this phrase when people kind of say things to me, and you said something in one of our previous conversations that really resonated with me because it sounded like me saying it. And sometimes you'll say, I don't know, you'll see something really bad on the television, and somebody who you're with says, why would somebody do that? And I always look at it from a really, almost fiercely logical point of view. And I would say, because it makes them feel good in some way. Yeah. That's the only reason. And last time we spoke, you said something very similar, which was I think it was, I know I'm massively paraphrasing you here, but every bad habit occurs because it makes you feel good in some way. And it could be, if you're feeling stressed, then sometimes eating can make you feel better. That's why we eat chocolate, to get that serotonin burst, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm a massive believer in that if you can figure out what it is that it's feeding or what need is demanding that feeling, then that feeling won't come along, and therefore you won't need to feed it anymore. I'm not sure if it's similar, but, and I'll be really honest on this, I don't mind being open about it. So I do have a challenge with this, because I hate seeing food left on plates. And at university, anybody watching this who went to university with me will recognize this from the first year. People would eat with their arms around their plate. Because I'd go, "Are you fit? Are you gonna eat all that?" They'd say yes, even if they weren't, because my thought would come in and go, "Yeah, I'll have a bit of that." And I'd hate to see things like that. But what's interesting is that, you know, recently I'm exercising more, but I still do kind of eat probably more than I need to. And I'd love to be able to fix that. But what was really interesting is that I recognized something very recently. I found that I wasn't being proactive enough in promoting my business in certain ways. And eventually I enrolled in a course. And this course has made me feel a lot more proactive about what I'm doing with my business. And the fascinating thing is that since that happened, I don't eat as much. Is that an example of what you're talking about?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the perfect example. Yeah, it's like this, as I said, invisible link, and to your point, like this acknowledgement that every habit, no matter if it's bad, especially bad habits, what we call bad, they have a positive intention. And that is also a way, and that's why when I talk to people, it's like, you got to come from a loving point of view when you look at what you're thinking, feeling, and doing, right? Because otherwise you are at war with yourself. If you're like, you judge yourself for all the bad things that you're doing, it's like you're at war with yourself. It's not a place of healing and of change. It's like your friction. You want to be like this. And yeah, so thank you. That's a perfect example of like, oh, you fixed something in one area and suddenly another area changed.
Wow.
And don't get me wrong, it's not perfect, but it's certainly changed. And
Yeah.
I sat there and thought, you know, you could be working, doing something, you think, this is really great, I'm enjoying this. And it's like, I haven't snacked today.
Yeah.
I didn't even, it's not like I thought about snacking and said no. It didn't even occur to me to snack.
Yeah.
No, I see this now in action. I actually can relate to this.
Yeah.
So I suppose the interesting thing then is that, and you know, kind of coming back to the whole purpose thing in the first place, is that it's one thing to have a purpose, and it's one thing to have a New Year's resolution.
Yeah.
But if it's fundamentally incompatible with your subconscious,
Yes.
then you're already coming from a place of challenge. It's like having a barrier sitting in front of you that you can't see, I suppose.
You're setting yourself up for failure, pretty much. That's why we see all these new resolutions fading away, right? Because it's like, I want, and we don't look inside. It's like we're so conditioned, and there's no judgment here, but we are so conditioned by what we see, what we hear, what we smell, by our five senses, that we totally neglect what is actually going on inside of us, and what is in there, and what is happening automatically. It's a natural way of, we have forgotten to really utilize, first of all, acknowledge, but also utilize our capacity. I mean, just imagine how we can go differently about our life and solve friction in companies, in teams, in departments, in whatever, right? It's like this, the values, right? Let's look at the values. What are the individual's values for working, for going to work? Is it just to make money? Or is there a safety? Are they in fear of their existence, right? Do they come to work because they fear that they cannot sustain their lifestyle? That's not a very empowering reason to get up every morning, right? So there lies a lot.
But it's a massively present one, though, isn't it? Because if you haven't got money, I'm on the street.
Yeah.
I agree. It is in your face. Yes.
Wow. So this, do you want to say something, Paul?
Well, the only other thing I was going to say is that I suppose that's when you look at it from a personal barrier point of view. Organizationally, one of the big frustrations, and it's probably one of the things that contributed to me ultimately leaving the city, the financial services industry, is that there were also barriers that organizations put in place within the organization itself. Because obviously we look at the individuals and that's one thing, but we shouldn't lose sight of the other things that we put in place that we kind of think we're doing it for the right reasons, but we don't realize the unintended consequences. So for example, one of the big things I always used to see was that you had, let's say, I mean, I worked in technology, IT, and then you had another division, and it seemed like they were the division that had all the power. Now, what division do you think that was? Any idea?
Well, the power lies with the money.
Finance, exactly. Okay, they had all the power. And what was really fascinating is that there was sometimes you'd listen to a struggle that was going on within an organization, and you would listen to people within technology, and you would listen to them talking about the people who were in finance, about how they were stopping them from doing what they knew was the right thing to do. And when you listen to the conversation, you'd think, it sounds like they're enemies. It sounds like they hate each other. But when you look at it from that higher level, it's like saying, it's like two players on a football team basically hating each other and not realizing that the only way they were going to win is if they came together and worked like a team. And that always kind of caught my eye. I kind of think, why are two teams within the same company all dependent on the same success, which was that company thriving? Why are they at odds with each other? And where I came to was in how we set targets, how we set objectives, not just for people, but for departments.
Yeah.
You know, you'd set a budget. I've got a budget in here and I've got a budget in here. And it doesn't matter if it's better that this organization gives some of its budget to this one to make it better, and it would ultimately take us to the right place. They wouldn't give it away. I can't give it away because it's mine. And it's almost like, that's almost like a subconscious. You are building it into their psyche. I can't help anybody else because I will suffer. But ironically, you do suffer because the whole company suffers at the end.
Yeah. I mean, it's this me mentality still, you know, and I think that's what we're trying to break in organizations now. It's not about the individual contribution. It's about the collective contribution and what can the collective do together to integrate some of these things. But yeah, it's breaking that tradition, or perhaps, I mean, even goes back to our subconscious, you know, because we all want to be seen, and we all want somebody to say that we did a good job, and that goes back to our worthiness. So now we become worthy, and it's like a whole deep conversation.
Well, I mean, it feels like, I mean, to me, and I may be massively oversimplifying it, and please excuse me if I do, Lars, and please correct me, but it feels like that model, that meta model, which is we will give departments individual budgets, that feels like the equivalent of an organizational subconscious. Yeah, it's like we're basically saying we are going to work in a certain way, and nobody kind of sees that it's having a bad effect at all. Whereas if you pulled that away and said, actually, there are no individual budgets, we're going to hire the right people, we're going to ask people to do the right thing, and we're going to monitor them to make sure they are doing the right thing. But ultimately, what we're asking people to do is head for one set of very, very small targets, which are to promote customer service, to promote whatever it might be. And as long as you are working towards that end, then you will be rewarded accordingly without putting these really micro level constraints on individual. It's like having a constraint on an organ and killing the body because you've done it.
Yeah, I think that's really coming from the incentive point of view. So at how are these departments measured? How is the marketing department measured? How's the sales department measured? How's the IT and whatever technology department measured? It's like conflicting incentives from an organizational point of view. And that's just from the framework that you're giving people to operate in. And they align. Because their personal goals are aligned with their department goals. Right? So I think, and since there's all this trend about emotional intelligence and the human capital and how can we capitalize and align our human capital with the company, I think it really has to start from the top and looking at, okay, where there's a bunch of individuals and they all carry their own stories and issues in their backpack. How can we, first of all, it's like a top-down approach. You can, and I had a conversation with a client of mine. He has a global function in a multinational company. That, well, would we have to start that on really with a C-level? It's like, no, you can actually prototype that demo in a department, in a team, and just see how friction, because there's friction probably. There's something in every team, right? And so you can dissolve that. You started as a department head, right? So now suddenly your behavior changes, the words that you're using, the way you're interacting with them. And then let's work with the others and see how that changes. And that's, so you could create a little model within the company, and then say, okay, guys, this is what we did. Now let's blow it up, so to say. So that approaches to, and let's see, how do we have to rethink the framework that you were talking about, Paul? How does that fit into this new model? How can we do this differently so we don't have that friction and clash across departments? Besides speaking a different language, by the way, right? Because they use different terminology. It's like sometimes two countries talking to each other within.
It certainly does feel that way. And it's a shame, because you look at it from the outside and you think it doesn't need to be that way. I mean, I look at managers now, and you see the majority of managers' targets, in my wording, targets, the middle step T, and it's very target focused on results. And I find that really quite interesting, because if you think about it from an expert point of view, if you were a technologist, you would normally be measured on results, delivering a project, doing whatever else. But then when you become a manager, you don't really get any different targets. They're still the same targets. You've got to deliver this, got to deliver that. And I've always looked at it from the point of view, but a manager has got a very different role, in my opinion. And this is why I think I was okay at it, was because my primary role, I didn't see, was to deliver targets. My primary role was to make it as easy as possible for the people who work for me to do their job. So my targets, as they were very people focused. How are my people feeling? Are they in the right place? Have they got the right facilities available to them to be able to do their job? How's their well-being? Are they taking lots of sick days? And if so, why is that happening? It felt like the manager almost had a different focus. And because of that, they should have a different set of targets. But we're giving everybody the same targets. And no wonder people don't care about people, because they're not incentivized to care for people. They're incentivized to make sure targets get done.
Yeah, and they're squeezed into a role that has certain responsibilities, certain requirements, and they may not be fully aligned with that, right? And maybe all kinds of internal things going against what they actually have to deliver day in, day out. And so I think there's huge potential to really break up this. I call it the old world of doing business. It can be done different, and that doesn't matter what the size of the organization is. And just by looking more into, we're all humans with feelings and with a background and with a history, and that's like totally brushed. It's like somebody asked me, like, what makes you get up in the morning now since you shifted your direction? I was like, the core thing is I feel like my two personalities are now one. Right? Before I had this title, I was an executive and I had all these responsibilities, and then I came home and there was another guy. And now I get up in the morning and I don't. I'm the same guy all day long.
That's
right?
amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think that's because you're living your purpose. You're living out your purpose. And so now you don't have to be two different people. You're one. And it's amazing to kind of have that life. But hey, guys, we're just out of time right now. So I wanted to just close our conversation. This has been super interesting. You both gave me so many good ideas and insights. And Lars, I'm still like thinking about that emotional eating thing. I'm going to go back to that. I'm excited to check that out. And then
I thought you were going to say then. I thought you were going to say, I'm just going to have a snack and think about it.
No, I'm actually, you both made me think of a different angle on it, because I used to do a lot of shopping, believe it or not. Yeah. And I used to go there because I was having actual problems in my life. And so I would go to shop. That was my escape, right? But I never looked at eating as an escape for me, because it wasn't shopping. Shopping was my actual like addiction. Food wasn't never an addiction for me. It wasn't like I was numbing. I never really like connected it to the emotional piece, you know? So I need to dive deeper into that space and look at that 95% of my subconscious brain and check that out, especially as I create my mission statement for this year and my objectives, because I will be doing that.
What's this year called?
You know, I have to think about that.
Oh, what was last year called?
Last year was called, hold on, I have it here. 2020, the fabulous year of health and prosperity.
Wow. As we go into a pandemic.
It's exactly what it was. But you know what's so funny? I tell people this all the time. Although there was a pandemic in the world, I still had a fabulous year of health and prosperity.
Yeah, I agree, actually.
Why? Because I had intentionally made it that way.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, if you could look at my year, I have to do a recall of the year, but really I did some amazing things this year. And it was because I put my stake in the ground in the beginning of the year. The world could have fallen apart. I was still having the year of health and prosperity.
And so is the message, therefore, going into this next year, that it's about, first of all, at least start by creating a purpose, and then work on figuring out whether it's compatible with you?
Yeah, I mean, discovering your purpose is huge. So that is I think that's the first step, right? In this is to really understand what your purpose is, because none of the other pieces sort of flow right unless you get that right first. So
you can't test it. So
you can't test it. You can't really dive into, you know, your things that are blocking you. You can't schedule your life accordingly, you know, and things of that nature. So
we have all the components here in this call. It's beautiful.
Yeah, you remove. It's like a milking stool. You remove one of them, and you're over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I brought you guys together, because I wanted to have this discussion, because they do all fit together, you know, and you can't have one without the other. I think that's a song. You can't have one without the other. Yeah, so that's a song.
Yeah, I think it's over now. I think we're done.
Yeah. That would be our time to go. We're going to sign off right now. I'd like to thank Lars and Paul for being amazing today. And I encourage you to have a great year, discover your purpose, stay on course, and have a great day. Though I struggle and